All right, everybody, let's stand up for your rights. Peace. Talk about peace. Thank you, Cult. Good stuff from the Cult. We're going to go to part two of the news notes because there's breaking news just over the past 90 minutes. This has come out. Breaking. Iran says no thanks when U.S. asks for 48-hour ceasefire. Yeah, and of course, down below this, I commented likely because the Iranian government knows Trump is lying and probably intends to attack under the auspices of such a so-called ceasefire. Yes, of course. So let's head on over there and check this out. Here is the word Thunderbird. Greece is the word Thunderbird. You got it. Holy crap. America asked for 48-hour ceasefire and Iran said no. That's right.
A little bit of breaking news coming out of the Middle East. Hearing in the last few moments from the Reuters news agency that Iran has rejected a US proposal for a 48-hour ceasefire. That's according to an unnamed source speaking to the Fars news agency. Iran rejecting a US proposal, apparently, for a 48-hour ceasefire. We'll keep across that for you.
I don't understand. I thought the United States had dominance in everything from the air to the sea to soup to chili, everything. I mean, you couldn't get tea in Iran without Donald Trump's permission. I thought they had utter and total control. And yet, that's not what we're hearing, and it's not what we're seeing. That's right. Let's go to Daniel Davis's deep dive with the breaking news about the aircraft that have been downed. You'll see the information about the F-15. I wasn't able to get in the Warthog information, but of course we want to remember another one from last week, plus two more. Here's Daniel Davis mentioning 4 U.S. aircraft reported either shot down or damaged over Iran today. 1 F-15, 1 pilot still missing, 1 recovered by the United States, an A-10, of course, the Warthog, and 2 Blackhawks, one of which was sent out to try to do the rescue mission for the F-15. This after Secretary of War Crimes, Hegseth, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, continue to tell America all of Iranian air defenses have been obliterated. Self-evidently, that was untrue. The Intercept has revealed in the last 24 hours that Pentagon officials have also been hiding actual U.S. military casualty numbers. Why is the White House and why is the Pentagon, why are they so opaque with the American people on the truth of this war? And of course, it's not a declared war. Does anybody really care? Does anybody really know what time it is? The justification for launching this war, writes Daniel Davis, this war of choice, was also an absolute lie. The alleged so-called imminent threat of a nuclear Iran, even after the same administration claimed their ability had been, quote, obliterated last year. Is this an insult to your intellect? I think so. Is this an insult to your status as a human being? That's for darn sure. Further, they lied to us by claiming the Iranian regime was as weak as it has been in 47 years. How many times did you hear that one from the Muppet Show? Prior to the war, and that's an insult to the Muppet Show. Prior to the war, they said this, implying that all we needed to do was push hard and they would collapse. That obviously didn't happen either. And now here we are with a rising casualty count, increasing numbers of combat losses, now into the many billions of dollars, and the allegedly weak Iranian government and military firmly in control of the Strait of Hormuz. We have no military means to force it open. We forfeited the option of negotiations because we twice lied to Iran about good faith diplomacy, only to reveal that we, the United States government that sucks us in with it, used it as cover to launch military ops. This is the bitter fruit of fraud and arrogance. I fear we've yet to find out how deep the cost will be before this war finally comes to an end. So there you go. The Warthog, Apache, and the F-15. 2 Blackhawks, I should say. So what are we to make of this, huh? Well, I had a conversation with a friend from Washington, and he is, that was about 2 hours ago, and he is in agreement with me. He thinks that Trump is going to move this weekend, maybe on Easter Sunday. What do you think of that? And Larry Johnson thinks he's going to try to put boots on the ground inside Iran. Now, let's see what has happened in that wonderful ancient realm of Persia. Isfahan, a city of more than 2,500 years old, is being bombed to the ground as part of the U.S. effort to bring Iran back to, as Donald Trump said, the Stone Age. Look at that. That's from Glenn Deason. But of course, that won't make anybody angry on the ground at all, seeing their homeland attacked. Nah, it'll be fine. The Persians will bow down to Donald Trump. They'll want a McDonald's on every street corner, owned by Donald Trump, Inc. Now, as we were getting ready to do the show, the judge was on with Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern, and I hope people will check that out. Maybe not during our show, but we might even refer to some of the things that they had to say because they were really on the ball today. As always, rather than going at 4, they went at 5:30 today. So just wanted to let you know that. And some awesome stuff from all sorts of people. Mariel Nafal went for about 6 hours today with various guests. It was amazing. Now, I want to give you a reminder, of course, of what Trump did yesterday, attacking the B-1 bridge west of Tehran and killing many civilians who were picnicking beneath the closed bridge. I didn't know this when I reported on this last night, but it was Anti-War's Dave DeCamp in his 9:30 to 10 o'clock video release on Rumble who mentioned that. And you could see the people in the photograph that he showed. That is absolutely an utter tragedy, just disgusting. And of course, Trump bragged about that hit afterwards. So Ben Norton writes this: what the U.S. is doing in Iran is barbaric. Trump is intentionally targeting civilian infrastructure and boasting about it. The U.S. military launched a double tap strike on a bridge with no military activity, massacring Iranian civilians who were picnicking. Just amazing. And I got to say, you know, we start the program off pretty quickly with music and a lot of quick talk and so on. So I hope a lot of these terms don't slide by with the current of the news cycle, with the river of news that comes around. But there you go. Trump hails strike on Iranian bridge, warning more to follow. Unbelievable. With a double tap, just like they did with the girls in that school. So they haven't learned anything. They haven't learned at all. They don't care. They don't care at all. Now, as I noted here, Trump's truculence is matched only by his utter dismissal of ethical norms. He has driven Iran's government to shut the Persian Gulf to any traffic affiliated with the U.S. or Israel, and the Iranians, again, are issuing statements that they will not negotiate with the U.S. on U.S. terms. The Iranian government, as we are here on Good Friday, headed to Easter, the Iranian government has its own demands and refuses to meet American officials in Pakistan. No wonder, because the United States government is run by a bunch of thieves and liars. Here is Mario Nafal with Lawrence Wilkerson. I recorded this live as they discussed the latest on the U.S. aggression in his epic 6-hour broadcast today. They discussed the F-15 jet that was shot down and the fact that the U.S. aggression is backfiring.
So they're just being, and by the way, just as you're speaking, Colonel, to give you some context, there were reports of a Black Hawk helicopter that was shut down. That was not shut down, that was shot. Now, according to, who was it according to? Newsmax, 2 U.S. officials now confirmed to Newsmax that one of the pilots has been rescued. Search and rescue operations continue. We've seen video of HC-1 helicopters. One source tells me a Black Hawk may have also been hit, not shut down, hit over Iran while conducting rescue operations to find the second F-15 pilot. I'm told the Black Hawk was tailed by a trail of smoke as it crossed into southern Iraq from Iran today. So that just came in today as well. Iran did make the claim, and now we have information. And there's something more significant that happened. Iran has, according to Wall Street Journal and Intelligence Online, Iran has just rejected Pakistan's offer to mediate in the conflict. Qatar will now take the lead ahead of next week's talks. They've rejected. So that's according to Intelligence Online, and it's even more dramatic than that. According to Wall Street Journal, I'll read out what Wall Street Journal said. I was just reading it there. Iran has rejected all U.S. requests to seek an end to the war, Colonel, and refuses to meet with American officials in Islamabad.
And that's pretty much what Foreign Minister Araghchi said to Al Jazeera English.
But I thought this is more of a public statement. But now, because you know how the rhetoric is one thing, but they say public is one thing, but behind the scenes is another. It seems that he meant what he said.
I don't doubt it. Were you referring to the 5-point plan that China and Pakistan put out? Is that?
I think so. There's talking about the mediation by Pakistan. I don't know if that's the meeting that was being. I don't think that's that plan. That's, I think, the meeting that was being organized maybe with J.D. Vance or some others on the U.S. side and the Iranian delegation, where one of them got actually shot by Israel. Israel tried to kill one of them 2 days ago. They killed his wife, and he's in critical condition according to some reports. He was the former foreign minister that was helping organize those mediations in Pakistan. Well, he was shot 2 days ago. That really upset me.
And of course, I'm sure you remember that as we covered that last night. And he lost his wife. It's just he was and Wally's got a comment inside X. He says that's because we'll assassinate them. As he has it somewhere in there. Thanks, Wally. Yeah, because we will assassinate the negotiator. Absolutely right, man. Absolutely right. It's just disgusting. It's so stupid.
So I'm not sure if that's related to the court to the meeting being cancelled. But I
know that from listening to the foreign minister, their complete renunciation of whatever is being presented to them, and it isn't also from him, it isn't being presented to them directly. There have never been any talks between Witkoff, Kushner, or any of Trump's team, Rubio, whatever, and Iranians. It's all been third and fourth parties and third and fourth dialogues, if you will.
I think the Iranians are in a position they don't want to talk.
Yeah, that's it. And Araghchi was very clear about that. They're duplicitous. They lie. They cheat. We don't want to talk to them. And I think he's adamant about that. And the fact that he comes on as he does in English, not always in English. He did one in Farsi and had to be translated with Al Jazeera English. But usually when he comes on in English, it's kind of like Netanyahu using Hebrew, except Araghchi is straight shooting honest, and Netanyahu is a liar and uses English to lie and best. So when Araghchi says what he said, I see that this has failed. This has failed completely. It's done exactly what every air campaign in the history of air power has done.
Colonel, it's worse. It hasn't only failed where it hasn't achieved its objective. It's achieving the opposite, and that worries me because Iran because they have the upper hand, they're boxing Trump in. And I worry that could lead Trump to lash out in very violent ways because he doesn't seem like someone that would like to be boxed in. So if Iran doesn't give him an off-ramp, if Iran starts to cause a split between him and Europe, and maybe with the support of China and Russia, and China supplying components to Iran, Iran is making more money through the control of Strait of Hormuz, through the toll booth of charging $2 million per vessel, by exporting more oil at a higher price. They're making more money, the IRGC is, and they're getting drones, allegedly not confirmed, from Russia. So you put all these things together, they want to avenge the death of Khamenei. They want to deter this happening ever again, so causing as much damage as possible to the US so it doesn't happen for decades to come. And they could be getting enough support from China and Russia that are recommending for this war to go on, because that's the best way, their best opportunity to weaken the US, more than Ukraine, more than anything else, more than any other opportunity they've had in a long time.
And you just summed up Araghchi's last point. You must leave the region completely. There must be no vestige of U.S. military power or even a resemblance of it left in the region. That's a condition that they have for ending this conflict.
I just didn't think, I thought that was a negotiating. I didn't know it was a condition. I thought it was a negotiating position.
Well, I think it's the way he stated it. It is it. You have to get out.
Absolutely right. Now, if you will indulge me, I would like to present to you what is in part one of my news notes, bouncing off of that. And going into what we noted on the billboard, which I'll show on the screen once more, that's static right now for my position on the Rumble chat. I can see the Rumble chat, which is great, and we can put the billboard up there anytime. We'll scroll down on the Rumble chat and say hi to everybody. And great to see you, Jason. Smuhosky, great to see you. Angelo, thank you for being there. So we're looking at Iran rejecting the absolutely foolish ceasefire proposal from Don. Now, what is the current status of the U.S. aggression? And is that what USA means now? So let's head on back over here and go to News Notes Part 1 of 2. So this is a special report that I put together this morning on the U.S. empire hobbling itself in Iran. And so was up early and just started to work on this. Put in a number of links, mostly text, mostly analysis, and based on a couple of conversations that I've had with people in Washington, I speculated just a little. Let me give you some of this information on the ground. And just to mention, of course, if you've played chess, right, you know that there are certain force multipliers if you are on the offense and you can gain new pieces. And one of the things that ends up happening is you get into a rapidly escalating situation as the game begins to wind down because the other side has fewer options. So the game goes faster and faster and faster and faster and faster until finally they don't have any more options left. This is what's happening to Trump right now. Trump is running out of things, and the Iranians are finding that they have strategic and tactical force multipliers based on their control of the Strait of Hormuz. And things are moving more rapidly because Trump is getting desperate. And that's extremely dangerous for everybody, especially for the people in Iran. And for those people who fear tactical nuclear weapons might be an outcome. Well, I'm hoping that the Israelis will be afraid enough that Iran can get their hands on something that they could use in a way, as we saw Professor Postel from MIT mention, that they could really bring some devastation inside Israel in addition to their hypersonic missiles and things. I'm just hoping that Netanyahu doesn't do what many think he might do. Because as you saw Mario say, you know, Trump is getting boxed in. And this desperation could lead to some extremely dangerous things. We're already seeing them doing just utterly reckless and useless, needless attacks just to show off, to blow up bridges that were part of, supposedly big achievements for the government of Iran, that gigantic bridge, just to basically throw the middle finger in their faces for using U.S. military. Let me give you this. This is as you see on the screen, a special report on the U.S. empire hobbling itself in Iran. More than a month has passed since the United States and Israel launched an immoral and unconstitutional war against Iran. And it seems increasingly clear that Tehran is winning this military conflict. Today, Iran shot down a U.S. F-15. Now, I wrote this before the other ones came around. Evidently, only the second time a foreign nation has done so since the plane was introduced. According to CNN, one U.S. pilot has been recovered by the Trumpian aggression force. And, of course, here's the headline from CNN. Live updates. Iran war. U.S. rescues one of two crew members from fighter jet down over Iran forces, sources say. Okay, so there you go. That's that. And Israeli censorship cannot hide all the devastation Iranian retaliation is bringing to cities such as Tel Aviv. So let's watch Jerry Nolan, as Jerry's got some of the footage that they could not stop. He has Israel's military censorship has been working overtime to keep you from seeing what's actually happening inside the country. Hypersonic right there. You never know how badly it's being pounded by relentless waves of Iranian missiles. You would never know this. These are scenes out of Apocalypse Tel Aviv. It never had to be this way.
Yo, Nafira!
So Al Jazeera providing that, and thank you, Al Jazeera, despite the old connection to Al Jazeera Gore. Now, even major Western newspapers are admitting this reality. The Independent published an article called "Iran is the Clear Winner as Trump and his desperate bid for peace shows that he wants out of the war." I think that Trump is lying. I think he's preparing something for the weekend. And so do my friend, well, at least one in Washington. The appearance of the article from them and its content are remarkable because most Western media outlets have supported every major U.S. war for decades, including 2 wars on Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, and the conflicts in Libya, Syria, and Yemen. So the Independent seems to know that Iran is very clearly the dominant force here. The list goes on and on regarding United States influence and corruption around the world, yet this is the first war I've seen in which many major media outlets have criticized the conflict from the beginning. Politico, for instance, published an op-ed arguing that the U.S. war on Iran is a far bigger blunder and strategic error than the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. The piece from Politico was written by the former U.S. ambassador to NATO, someone who previously supported the war on Iraq. And I use that term very, very loosely. Please understand when I'm talking about war there. I should be saying the undeclared military aggression. And I do that sometimes, but not all the time in this article. And beyond the online writing, the proverbial writing is on the wall. It is becoming obvious to more and more people that Iran is winning this war by not losing and by closing the Strait of Hormuz to U.S.-Israeli tied traffic. Even Foreign Affairs, the official publication of the Council on Foreign Relations, has published an article, right there hyperlinked, acknowledging that Iran is winning. The author, a professor at Johns Hopkins University, points out that if one uses traditional metrics of conventional war, it may appear that Iran is not doing well. But she argued that these are the wrong metrics for assessing Iran's position. The real position is whether Tehran is achieving its strategic objectives. She concluded that Iran is doing so, and therefore Iran is winning the war. Tehran had been preparing for nearly 4 decades, and the professor wrote that Iran is now executing a strategy that has managed to neutralize key U.S. and Israeli air defense batteries, severely damage U.S. military bases in the Persian Gulf so that they cannot be repopulated, inflict substantial economic pain, and drive a wedge between the United States and some of its Gulf allies. So let's explore in detail how Iran seems to be winning this war by examining its strategic goals and assessing how Tehran has been accomplishing them. The first and most obvious goal is preventing regime change and state collapse. And obviously, the United States and Israel initially believed they could destroy the Iranian government through so-called decapitation strikes, targeting Iranian political and military leaders, and of course, economic warfare that Mr. Bessent loved so much. Well, they failed to do so. In fact, the Iranian government not only has shown resilience, it likely is stronger now because it enjoys greater popular legitimacy. Even many critics of the government inside Iran have rallied behind the flag and are supporting the state in its effort to prevent the U.S. and Israel from taking control of their country. Another key Iranian strategic goal is to expel the U.S. military from the region, as we mentioned, those bases. For decades, the United States has surrounded Iran with military bases, building up roughly 24 installations in neighboring countries. In response to this war of aggression, Iran retaliated in self-defense and struck most of those bases. The Turkish state media outlet Anadolu Agency compiled official data on the Iranian strikes. On March 30th, after a month of this conflict, it reported that Iran had carried out at least 5,471 missile and drone attacks targeting U.S. bases and critical sites in southern Arab countries allied with the United States. These attacks have been remarkably successful. The New York Times reported that the United States has been pushed out of virtually all of its bases in the region. In an article entitled "Iran's Attacks Force U.S. Troops to Work Remotely," the NYT noted that, as we know, many American troops have had to relocate to hotels and office spaces throughout the region. This also explains why Iran has struck many hotels. They contain U.S. military targets operating from civilian facilities, of course. Now, the NYT, I want to continue with them. They have not always been anti-war, obviously, and they strongly supported the 2003 invasion of Iraq, as well as the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and of course, they supported the attack on Ukraine for quite a while through subterfuge and overthrow. Well, they quoted U.S. military officials acknowledging that much of the land-based military is now, in essence, fighting the war while working remotely. Before the war began, there were around 40,000 U.S. troops in West Asia. Many have since been relocated, some as far away as Europe, while the original bases, including the massive Al Udeid Air Base and the headquarters of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, have been rendered uninhabitable. This raises the question of where these troops have gone. A Wall Street Journal article titled "Europe is quietly playing a crucial role in the Iran war," and I'm going to juxtapose this with some other developments that you'll see in the second news notes about European countries, in particular, a statement from Macron that I have recorded. Well, this piece from the Wall Street Journal, "Europe is quietly playing a crucial role in the Iran war," reveals that the U.S. military is now relying heavily on bases across Europe. U.S. bombers, drones, and ships are being fueled, armed, and launched from installations in the UK, Germany, Portugal, Italy, France, and Greece. But things are changing in Italy, France, and of course Spain, and we'll see what happens with the UK. The nerve center is Ramstein Air Base, of course, in Germany. These European bases are facilitating one of the most logistically complex operations the U.S. military has undertaken in decades. The report notes that most European U.S. allies have been extremely supportive, with roughly 40 U.S. military bases across Europe hosting 80,000 American personnel, all on your tax dime. Europe, well, with all those troops, they have become a launch pad for operations in the Middle East and Africa. This means countries such as the UK, Germany, France, Italy, Portugal, and Greece are now active parties to the war crimes, regardless of any claims of neutrality. So what happens to their shipping? That's a big question. They are allowing their territory to be used to wage war against Iranian civilians. Now, returning to Iran's strategic goals, it can be said that, at least in the short term, Tehran largely has succeeded in expelling the U.S. military from West Asia. While the United States might attempt to rebuild some bases after the war, another major Iranian objective is to force the Persian Gulf regimes to reconsider future alliances with the U.S. and with Israel. Previously, these regimes believed U.S. bases protected them. Well, now it's evident that hosting those bases endangers them, because Iran justifiably will strike any country that facilitates American aggression. This reality is already prompting second thoughts within some Middle East nations. Even if Gulf monarchies ultimately allow the bases to remain or return, the fact that they are being forced to consider their alignments represents a strategic victory for Tehran. Iran also has sought to convince the other Gulf regimes to stand against normalizing relations with Israel. After the 2020 Abraham Accords normalized ties between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain, the U.S. reportedly pushed Saudi Arabia and others to follow suit. Well, this war is likely to make those regimes far more hesitant, as they now see the high costs of close alignment with the U.S. and Israel in any future conflict with Iran. Furthermore, Iran has long wanted sanctions lifted. In 2015, Iran signed the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with the United States and other world powers. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed Iran was complying. Yet in 2018, the Trump administration unilaterally withdrew from the agreement in violation of international law and then imposed harsh sanctions. Just weeks before this current military aggression, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent boasted on Fox News that these sanctions had collapsed Iran's economy. Ironically, one result of the war is that the United States momentarily has been forced to lift some sanctions because of the United States economy and the world economy. Bessent himself had to grant exceptions, allowing Iran to export oil. This happened because Iran demonstrated its leverage by controlling the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most important transit choke point. Now, before we continue with some of that essay that I wrote and the reporting that I've got with links in about things like the Shahed drones and the force multipliers for Iran, I want to go back to the second news notes today and go with more from Mario Nawfal and his conversation with Aaron Mate.
From the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, even though some ships are going through the straits, the increase in energy prices and the massive supply shock. We saw the massive divergence yesterday between dated crude and futures, which means crude, for anyone that needs crude right now, the price is significantly higher, the highest it's been since 2008 because of the massive lack of, the massive shortage that we're facing. Aaron, how are you? Been a while.
Hey, Mario, how you doing?
Good, man, good. Struggling to make sense of everything. You know, I've said this a few times, but it just keeps getting worse. We have the F-15 shot, as you know, one pilot rescued, one pilot still missing. Iran trying to capture the second pilot. We have a Black Hawk helicopter that was shot. More importantly, the media, the Wall Street journals, is reporting that the mediation efforts that were being brokered by Pakistan have hit a dead end because Iran rejected all U.S. requests to seek an end to the war. There's no counter proposal whatsoever. And that comes 2 days. I'm not sure if you saw the report that allegedly Israel targeted the person that was brokering that meeting between American delegation and the Iranian delegation in Pakistan. They tried to kill him. He's in critical condition. His wife is dead. Israel, you know me, I'm always trying to be as balanced as I can, but the things that Israel has done over the last 2 days have really, 3 days, the statement by the defense minister, the law that was passed by the Knesset, the death penalty for Palestinians, and the targeting of that negotiator that Trump was praising, and Trump wanted him to broker this meeting in Pakistan for Israel to target him. It's another shock to me. And we've got, as you were speaking as well, ballistic missiles being launched from Iran to Israel. Iran that has, according to recent reports, 50% of their launches, according to intelligence officials that spoke to CNN, 50% of their launches have not been destroyed, and of their drones. And I was just speaking to Colonel Wilkinson before this, and he was telling me that Iran could still manufacture missiles, not drones, missiles on the ground. Aaron, where are you at with all this?
Well, those stats that you relayed about Iran's remaining capacity, on top of the fact that they just shot down a U.S. fighter jet over their own territory, underscores that what's probably happening with Trump and the people around him is what happens in all major wars like this, where you just tell the president what he wants to hear. And he's not being given an honest assessment of the war, or maybe himself just doesn't want to hear an honest assessment of the war. Even if he's being given it, he's not processing it, because he's been bragging about Iranian air defenses being wiped out and they have no army left. And they're showing that, in fact, that's not true. And Trump's then only strategy at this point appears to me to just blow up as much Iranian infrastructure as he can, sort of out of vengeance. He's gone after steel factories.
Yeah, he's and I paused it there because, of course, Mario is doing a great job. And it's interesting. I have disagreements with Mario Nawfal on various things, and but he had just a stellar lineup today. I don't know if he was doing a fundraiser or what, but he was just going and going and going. It was like the Boston Marathon. It was amazing. And he had, one after another after another. Obviously, he must have had a producer who helped him out. But I want to talk a little bit more about the situation for the United States, and then start looking into the corrupt body of the United States government and people like Pete Hegseth as they start to unravel, and many, many members of the military are being booted out because they don't think this is wise. So let's get back to this about oil transit choke point and the Strait. In response to the war, Iran shut the Strait, contributing to a massive surge in global oil prices and the largest oil supply chain crisis in history. Iran has gone further by charging a toll on ships wishing to pass, demanding payment in Chinese yuan rather than US dollars. This directly challenges the petrodollar system and shows that attacking Iran carries severe economic consequences for the entire world. Tehran also has demonstrated escalation dominance by using low-cost asymmetric tactics, such as cheap Shahed drones costing $20,000 to $30,000 each to destroy billion-dollar U.S. assets. Iran has shown it can impose far greater costs on its adversaries than it incurs itself. And of course, we know the tunnels are very, very deep. They can do construction there for who knows how long. And the Pentagon already has requested an additional $200 billion for this war of aggression, unconstitutional impeachment fodder, and the Congress isn't doing anything, and they'll probably give them the money. Yet the U.S. military-industrial base faces severe bottlenecks, having already expended hundreds of Tomahawk missiles in the first 4 weeks alone, while producing only a few hundred per year. Finally, Iran has succeeded in establishing credible deterrence. It has shown the United States and Israel that any future war of aggression will be extremely costly. Iran can shut the Strait of Hormuz, destroy bases and infrastructure with cheap drones and missiles, deplete advanced air defenses, and destabilize the global economy. Its pain tolerance has proven far higher than that of its opponents. All of this explains why even major Western media outlets have traditionally supported U.S. wars have been forced to acknowledge an undeniable fact. Iran is emerging day by day as what we expected, the clear winner in this war of aggression started by the U.S. and Israel. We're living in an increasingly multipolar world. The U.S. empire no longer enjoys the unipolar hegemony it held in the 1990s and early 2000s. Its growing desperation, seen in attacks on Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba, threats against Greenland and Panama and Canada, and aggressive tariff policies only accelerates this decline. History shows that empires often fall victim to their own hubris, overextending themselves and underestimating their opponents. This war appears to be doing exactly that, further hastening the shift toward a more multipolar global order. And of course, the decline of the dollar, and perhaps, as Eric Peters and I discussed last night, the move over to a CBDC. Now, inside Washington, let's talk about the madness of King Hegseth. Hegseth's mania is so pronounced, he has purged 24 military brass, evidently because they don't completely embrace his war madness. Here's more. Headline: Hegseth ousts Army Chief of Staff General Randy George. That's right. So here's the link right here. And then Daniel McAdams, of course, his piece underneath that, talking about the 24 so far, 24. But here's the story about Randy George. Defense, are you happy to see me? Or you're just Randy George. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has asked Army Chief of Staff General Randy George to step down and take immediate retirement. Sources familiar with the decision told CBS News. One of the sources said Hegseth wants someone in the role who will implement President Trump and Hegseth's vision for the Army, which is, of course, a Romanesque vision. Chief Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell, sort of like Carvel ice cream. You know, I found out that Tom Carvel invented soft serve ice cream. I'm Tom Carvel. You can get Cookie Puss and his cousin for St. Patrick's Day, Cookie O Puss and Fudgy the Whale. Yes, one of the sources said Hegseth wants someone in the role who will implement President Trump and Hegseth's vision for the Army. Chief Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell said in a statement to Cookie O Puss that George will be retiring from his position as the 41st Chief of Staff of the Army, effective immediately. And what a grand position to be in the great and vaunted history of the United States, following in the footsteps of such great masters. Yes. 2 other Army officers were removed from their roles in the past few days, according to 3 sources familiar with the matter. General David Hodney, who led the Army's Transformation and Training Command, and Major General William Green, who headed the Army's Chaplain Corps and had spoken out, of course, as we know. Well, Danny McAdams has this covered. George is the 24th general or admiral Hegseth has removed, but he is not the 24th. He is the one that matters. The Army Chief of Staff, the man whose signature sits between a president's intent and the order that sends soldiers across a beach or into a tunnel complex. That is pretty significant, Daniel. Thank you. Now, let me give you this. And here we go. Hegseth fires top Army general. This is from the production staff, the Russians. We cut about 4 or 5 different videos today. You guys are working hard. Here we go.
Abruptly fired Army Chief of Staff General Randy George, removing the Army's top officer amid the ongoing war in Iran. A Defense Department official says George was asked to step down and to retire immediately, with former Hegseth aide Christopher Lenev expected to take over as acting Chief of Staff. The Pentagon confirmed the move online, thanking George for his decades of service, but giving no explanation. 2 defense officials tell the Washington Post 2 Army generals also were fired alongside George. Nominated in 2023, George was expected to serve through 2027. He's a West Point grad and has held key roles in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The decision is raising questions on Capitol Hill, even among Republicans, including Republican Congressman Rich McCormick of Georgia, calling the firing concerning. So, Tom Nichols, you're writing about this firing in a new piece for The Atlantic. You write this, quote, even in less dangerous times, the public still would have a right to answers about such an unprecedented purge of the senior U.S. military ranks. George is not the first general to get an unwanted retirement invitation from an irate civilian leader. But America is now engaged in its biggest conflict in decades, with thousands of troops headed into possible combat on the shores of a country the size of Alaska, with more than 3 times the population of North Korea, and with a president whose only formal speech on the war so far consisted of 19 minutes of jumbled thoughts. The American people deserve to know why so many of their top officers are being tossed out of their jobs. And a lot of the reporting this morning, Tom, is that George tried to stand up effectively several times to Pete Hegseth on a lot of the decisions he was making, including the refusal to promote people, mostly women, some women of color who had earned those promotions, and Pete Hegseth refusing that. Just butting heads effectively with George cost him his job.
And if it were only George, and somehow we could trace this to a discrete decision that, the opposing Hegseth, for example, on the promotion lists, or Hegseth's interference in the Army's investigation into this chowder-headed stunt with the helicopters at Kid Rock's house, or some place where they had come to a conflict, you'd say, well, sometimes it happens. A general and a SecDef just don't get along. That's not what's going on. Hegseth has been on a rolling purge of senior officers from the moment he got here, got to the Pentagon. That's really concerning, because there needs to be some guidance behind that. I do think you need to explain to the American people, look, I'm cleaning out these officers because I want officers that have more of a certain kind of skill or more of a certain kind of background. And instead, it seems like this is in particular an animus against the army, which.
Yeah, and of course, it's an animus against anybody who opposes this ridiculous attack on Iran, this long-term goal that we heard about many, many years ago, and they are definitely trying to move on this. Now, let me show you some interesting information here. You'll see Macron. Macron had quite a remarkable statement. They covered this both at Daniel Davis's Deep Dive and at RT today. And there were multiples of us going on a couple different screens all day trying to catch news clips for you and stuff. And I want to go back to your comments, by the way, in just a moment. But Macron actually has a theme here that sets him apart from others in Europe in some cases, like Keir Starmer and others. And I want to get some thoughts on this. Plus, I want to show you what Patrick Henningsen had to say, because this is quite interesting. Patrick Henningsen of 21st Century Wire introduced a new piece at 21st Century Wire, and you'll see the headline on the screen there. Headline: The Hormuz Hype, How Europe Got Played at the Oil Casino. Now, a couple things that I want to bring up. You know that as we've discussed over the past couple of years about the United States overthrow of Ukraine, and then leveraging the Ukraine battle against Europe and its energy interests, as Iran document from 2019 suggested would be good to help sort of keep afloat in the sea of inflation, the U.S. petrodollar. Well, the U.S. petrodollar is falling apart, and they're still trying any way they can to keep it going. This piece by 21st Century Wire deserves a lot of attention. It's very interesting because what they did here, and we'll go into it after we hear from Macron and a couple other things, but we're going to go to this 21st Century Wire thing a little bit because I think it's very interesting. If we're talking about the United States government under Trump and its connections to some of the crypto meisters, and what they did with Honduras and the pro-ZA government, releasing the former president to promote the ZAs again and allow those corporations like Palantir, those to get back in there to get that land from the locals, basically through eminent domain or pay them pennies. If we think about what they're trying to do with Tether and with so-called stable coins, which are not stable. In order to do this, a financial institution has to purchase a certain amount of U.S. debt. That's propping up U.S. debt, right? So it's a parallel to the Federal Reserve System, which has been buying U.S. debt instruments. Now, in order to get on the stable coin wagon, which is not a stable coin, and it's not anonymous, the government's going to have access to it. It's their parallel to a CBDC, right? It's a parallel between the CBDC and the Federal Reserve System created by the federal government, which will allow big corporations connected to Trump, connected to the banks, to be able to get this, invest in U.S. debt, and then leverage that. And then start handing out loans that, of course, later, if they're reckless loans due to something like moral hazard, they'll get it paid back by the feds, of course, just like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So it's just like that mentality that we've seen so often through the decades of the 20th century. It's that sort of corrupt banking stuff. But what's interesting here is somebody at 21st Century Wire tied it together with oil leveraging, with bets on the oil markets that we saw as Trump has spoken up and spoken down the markets. Those effects, as we know, have been leveraged by people who had insider knowledge. Somebody was really smart about this. So we're going to go over here. Let's check this out from earlier this afternoon. First, let's see one of the positives here from Macron, which is quite interesting.
Iran is a very bad regime. No discussion about that. I disagree with them on a lot of topics. But I don't believe that we will fix the situation just by bombings or by military operations. Look at what happened with this type of operation in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya. We never delivered. Never. Even after 20 years. So you have to respect the sovereignty of people. If people want to change a regime, they want to react, step up, they can do so.
Okay, yeah. You wonder where that reasonable guy is when he's talking about the Russia-Ukraine war, but we'll table that for the moment. But he's right in what he's saying there, but he's also indicating because they're working with Iran to get their ships through the Strait of Hormuz. To your point there, it was open to France. They did the veto there, then they get their ship through. And who does that tell you that Europe is listening to?
Well, there's two things. Macron is a notorious flip-flopper, and he's done this with Russia, Ukraine multiple times. He sounds like he's on the right side of the issue. He's there with Putin. It all sounds great. He's sounding diplomatic, and then he flips the following week or two as soon as he gets back home. So that's the thing with, you have to be careful, just, caution with Emmanuel Macron. But what he's saying sounds plausible. It's certainly going to play well to the French public. And so because the public obviously is overwhelmingly against this war and against the economic effects of the war. Now, here's the scandal, Daniel. And if you go to 21st Century Wire, we kind of blew the whistle on it this week. And the article we have up there is the EU's Hormuz hype, we're calling it. So in terms of the price, right now, Europeans are getting gouged on gasoline. It's over €2.10 per liter. Okay, that's the equivalent, Daniel, of $7 to $8 a gallon U.S. prices. They're getting gouged, and the supply does not affect the European market almost at all. It's nominal. So what we've discovered here, and what you'll find when you research this, the cartel of energy companies have basically colluded to gouge consumers, and also the energy companies are in on this. There's a massive amount of crypto scams going on with stable coins for oil. So you have this total financialization that's already happened with oil and gas, and it's been weaponized. And a lot of people, and who knows, certainly there's evidence to suggest, according to the Financial Times and not me, that members of the Trump's inner circle have also profited greatly off of call options and put options to ride the oil up and down on the price volatility with announcements made by the president himself. That's not me making the accusation. This has been documented, and it's been in the Financial Times. Okay, so we have that on multiple fronts. So there's a lot of this opportunism going on with the Wall Street class, what one might call the Epstein class. These are people who are using this crisis, and who's paying for it? People in Europe, people in the United States, because the oil prices are set globally. So the markets, and also the stablecoin market and the crypto market, has built out this whole wing now of trading that is, I think, having a negative effect on terms of consumer prices and protecting consumers on this. This is a scandal of giant proportions. So just think about that. The actual closure of the Straits of Hormuz, which isn't closed anyway, it's almost exclusively oil heading for South Korea, Japan, China, and the Far East, almost exclusively. Very little going to Europe or going towards the West. So this is a huge scandal, what's taking place here. And the worst part about this is the Trump administration and the European leaders as well are lying to the public about this crisis. So there's been a price hype with this that has been used to gouge people. They're making so much money right now, and that is part of Trump's base. It is big oil and gas.
Now, I won't say that I necessarily agree with everything that's in this article or what Patrick mentioned there. And I do want to compliment and thank Karen Carpenter. Why do birds suddenly appear? I like that. And hopefully they're not the middle finger birds, angry birds, or like Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, Tippi Hedren getting attacked. Thanks, Karen. All right, so I want to head over to that piece from 21st Century Wire. You'll see this right here, okay? The Hormuz hype. Now, I want to touch on this. You'll see that there are probably a lot of themes that you've already been noticing or reading. You already know these things, but they go into this a little more in depth here. This came out yesterday. Freddie Ponton writes, Europe's oil shock was sold as a tragic consequence of the war on Iran and chaos in the Strait of Hormuz. The story was simple. Blame Tehran, blame geography. Tell Europeans there was no choice but to pay. Yet official documents quietly admit that the EU's direct dependence on Hormuz is limited and that the real impact came through prices, not empty fuel tanks. Now, people who understand the markets understand that prices can fluctuate based on expectations of the future. So that's something important to bring up here that I would love to talk to Freddie Ponton about. But we'll continue. While leaders repeated the script, Saudi crude was being rerouted around the strait through the east-west pipeline to Yanbu, Iraq, and Kazakh flows. Yanbu, Iraq, and Kazakh flows to Europe were kept alive through alternative corridors, and oil majors were telling investors that higher prices would boost profits. At the same time, on-chain data shows a hyperliquid whale at address 0 times 985F, moving millions in stable coins to build massive leveraged shorts on crude and Brent, turning the crisis into a 24-hour, not 24-hour constant, but a 24-hour short window casino. This investigation pulls those strands together and names what the official narrative left out. Europe did not just suffer a wartime oil shortage, it lived through a man-made price storm in which benchmarks, trading houses, whales, and regulators each played a part. Now, the way I am looking at this is, from your perspective, looking at me, I'm looking at this as a bubble of action that they could only take advantage of early on in the United States attack against Iran, when fear and worry about oil and so on and future prices could allow people to manipulate these things, but soon the ability to manipulate is going to go down because you're going to be running into these real shocks, which is what we've been seeing over the past week. In March 2026, European leaders put the war in Iran at the center of an energy drama that seemed to leave them powerless. Night after night, the public heard the same script. Iran had shut the Strait of Hormuz. 1/5 of the world's oil usually passes through that narrow channel. Prices at the pump would inevitably explode. Any attempt to resist the shock, they implied, would be irresponsible or even impossible. The French outlet France Soir was among the first to question whether this story really held up, asking whether the spike reflected genuine shortages or financial speculation. Their investigation raised the right question, but did not yet have the root-level data or on-chain evidence now available in our report. So again, this is at the start of the bubble. This is no longer relevant for what's going to be coming up. At their March summit in Brussels, EU leaders warned of the weaponization of the strait and talked about only temporary and targeted responses to soaring energy costs. Yet, in its own briefing on the outcome of the meetings of EU leaders, the 19th of March, the European Parliament quietly admitted that Europe's exposure to Hormuz was actually limited and that the strait was hitting the bloc mainly through prices, not through direct physical dependence. Okay, so I'm going to pause there because, of course, we know that worldwide shortages are going to affect even those places that appear to be insulated, just like we've discussed with the United States. After about a week, all holds are off. It's a circus after that. But during this time period is very interesting. And it's not future speculation here either. We're talking here about the EU imports of crude oil. And they said, we start with a basic question. Whose oil does Europe actually burn at first, right? The answer is not Iran. In a 2025 note on EU imports of crude oil, the European Parliament's think tank shows the United States as the EU's largest crude supplier at around 18% of imports in recent quarters, with Norway at roughly 14% and Kazakhstan near 8%. So again, this is that early window. It doesn't hold past the first week, but you can see how some of Trump's friends, and that they go deep into this article. It's really quite amazing. Some of Trump's friends associated with the stablecoin movement and Tether made a bunch of money beyond the knowledge that we got about somebody short selling right at the start. Very interesting stuff. And here you can see, of course, some of the charts as things started off. So I'm not going to go into super detail there, but I will recommend that if you want an opportunity to check it out, it is linked inside my Substack, and it's very worthwhile reading within that range only, because the rest of this, once things start getting really unraveled, then everybody's supply starts to deplete, and the United States is not going to be able to handle it, just like the Russians announced a couple days ago that starting in April, they were going to be withholding exports in order to shore up their own domestic supply. Very important. So we've got France possibly doing the right thing. That's kind of interesting. And then I want to talk about the global economy as we see this. Apocalyptic warning for the global economy. Now we move into where we are today. An expert confirms that even if the Strait of Hormuz opens soon, Trump's war has already wiped out 1 billion barrels of oil, guaranteeing a very, very deep global recession. We are heading for an economic collapse.
And having considered all that, and you talked at the beginning about just how bad it is right now, what are the outlook for the long-term economy with oil prices the way they are now, and if they're not going to come down anytime soon?
I think if the strait remains closed, this essentially guarantees a very, very deep global recession, even if the strait was open at the end of April. So I think what we heard from the president was that this is planned that, it's going to last 2 to 3 more weeks. Really, we've heard 1 to 2 more weeks every week of the war. So let's just say best case scenario, this is going to be done by the end of April, which means that the Strait of Hormuz is not going to reopen in the best case until early May. That means 2 full months of closure. That is already going to guarantee upwards of 1 billion barrels of oil not produced in the global market, given the forced shut-ins that have occurred across Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. That is a tremendous volume of oil and will keep the oil market tighter for longer.
Okay. Now, given that energy situation, what has the Trump administration EPA just done? Any of you familiar? Did you get to see the news today? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything like that. But if you go into my news notes, you'll see just down here, energy fuel help from the central planners. Yeah, here's how that looks. Atop the immorality of it all. Headline, EPA declares emergency gas relief that 97% of American pumps cannot sell and covers just 20 days. There's Bama Cooley. There's the headline. David Mancino reported this today. Gas just crossed $4.06 a gallon. The Iran conflict shut down the Strait of Hormuz, ripping 20% of the world's oil supply off the market, and pump prices jumped a full $1 in a single month. So, EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin announced an emergency fuel waiver effective May 1st through May 20th, removing federal barriers to cheaper E15 ethanol blend gasoline nationwide. E15 ethanol blend. That's like the magic slippers for all these central planners. Oh, it's ethanol. That's right. The corn conglomerate loves it. Can you get foreign ethanol, which is actually energy okay? Or do you have to use corn base, which is a net energy loser? They block foreign ethanol, which can be made from sugar beets. Why? Because it's more efficient than corn-based ethanol and packs something actually valuable rather than a political punch through lobbyists with Archer Daniels Midland in Washington. That's why ethanol is in your gas tank. And that's why places like Nebraska have state statutes where they want to put more in people's gas tanks, and they continually request this from the EPA to let them force the people in their state to have to use gas with higher ethanol, which is terrible for the engine. And don't try to store it. Well, relief, finally, the government says, except, of course, the waiver reaches roughly only 3,000 gas stations for the E15 blend. So, as the price of oil rises, the price of ethanol seems to look more reasonable. What do you think might be a factor in why ethanol looks more reasonable? Why field space is taken by corn rather than other things like soy or wheat that could feed people, as I wrote about during the George W. Bush administration, when they forced the ethanol content to be higher. And even Fidel Castro wrote in a Cuban newspaper that this was going to force up corn costs around the Central American and Southern American regions that were very poor and relied on corn for foodstuffs. And he was right. I actually said he was right in my article for, I think it was Foundation for Economic Education. Well, let me get into this. Why is ethanol so cheap compared to the rising price now of oil? Or why will it look relatively appealing? Why, of course, because it gets subsidized. That's why. Here it is. The article that I posted discusses a specific limited EPA emergency fuel waiver announced at the end of March, effective May 1st through the 20th, that temporarily removes federal barriers to nationwide E15 sales. They allow these in certain corn states, of course, because inside their state legislatures, they have massive sway. So it's 15, up from 10% in many cases. And again, remember, they have different fuel blends for different times of the year because ethanol is really bad in cold temperatures and it doesn't rise properly. So you get a smog in the cold. That, again, is why California, especially around the LA basin, got a waiver from the EPA to allow for higher regular gas fuel blends, because if they had ethanol, it would bring the smog back to LA that everybody knew about in the 70s and 60s. So again, this is for reducing the barriers and allowing for more E15 sales, 15% ethanol gasoline. And they relax the Reid vapor pressure rules during this period, the higher gasoline prices. So the vapor pressure rules have to do with the percentage of vapor in the atmosphere that they expect from the burning of the ethanol. It's all part of this EPA nonsense. Now, the article notes that this is the 5th straight annual summer waiver since 2022, but it affects only approximately 3,000 of 151,000 or more gas stations. 97% of pumps cannot sell it due to infrastructure costs, tank certification, and small refinery exemptions that have reduced blend obligations. The waiver from the EPA for more ethanol, because, of course, Donald Trump is attacking Iran. So now you're going to see more ethanol in some gas tanks, which you don't want. Well, the waiver provides a short-term, approximately 28% gallon discount option. In other words, the government will either reduce taxes or subsidize it, and I'm not sure which, but they already subsidize it. We'll get into it. But it is described as more symbolic, of course. No details on the amount of subsidies for this are available for that 28 cent per gallon. How much is tax relief? How much is subsidy? But let me give you some background about this, because the USDA is involved in this too, because it has to do with corn. So you get the EPA and the USDA. One, does the U.S. government subsidize ethanol production, agricultural crops, refining, or transport? Well, yes, of course they do. I've been writing about it since like 2004. Yes, the U.S. government provides ongoing support for corn-based ethanol at multiple stages through though the form of support has shifted from direct tax credits, which largely expired in 2011, to mandates and credits tied to low carbon performance and literal payments. Corn ethanol is treated as a so-called conventional fuel now. Agricultural crops, indirect but significant support via federal farm programs props up the corn market. These include crop insurance, price supports, and so-called conservation payments for field space to be devoted to corn. They lower the effective cost for corn growers because they subsidize the corn growth. Historical analyses estimate billions in pass-through subsidies from artificially low corn prices due to overproduction incentives created by the federal government of nearly $3.6 billion in subsidies from 1999 to 2008 alone. That was a study that I found. They have the Biomass Crop Assistance Program, BCAP, from the USDA. I wrote about that for Foundation for Economic Education 21 years ago. They offer establishment payments, annual payments, and of course, transport and harvest matching payments, subsidies. Then we've got refining. The primary ongoing mechanism for ethanol refining is the Renewable Fuel Standard administered by the EPA. It mandates annual volumes of renewable fuel blending. Ethanol is considered a renewable, creating guaranteed demand and value via renewable identification numbers that refiners and blenders trade or use for compliance. For 2026 and 2027, the EPA finalized an implied conventional biofuel volume of 15 billion gallons each year as part of higher overall renewable fuel targets. What does that mean? This acts as an effective economic support. They will subsidize 15 billion gallons a year based on the renewable identification number trading system. And I don't know how that works. Then we've got transportation. So we have multiple levels. We got the farmers, right? Then we have refining. Then there's transportation. Limited direct federal subsidies are also available for transport. BCAP offers short-term matching payments for transport, up to $20 for the dry corn transportation, and afterwards for infrastructure grants if they're going to be moving it through pipelines. Overall taxpayer support for the mature corn ethanol industry has totaled tens of billions of dollars historically. It's a net energy loser. It's a net economic loser. If it were a positive, you wouldn't need the government to provide all these incentives. So let me go down to the bottom of this. Let me give you some flex fuel information. E85 flex fuel exists, but it's niche. And I'll just mention this. The article highlights how even with waivers, infrastructure, and small refinery exemptions, they keep E15 availability low. And I noted corn-based ethanol is a net energy loser, requiring more energy to grow, harvest, move, store the grain, then refine the fuel. It's just logical, and transport than the energy the fuel provides at the pump. Now, if you want some really good stuff on that, there's a book called Makers and Takers by Edmund Kontoski, and it's Kontoski, Edmund Kontoski, and he is an energy engineer. And he was the first person who turned me on to the knowledge that ethanol was a net energy loser. Now, it's not as bad as it used to be because they've been able to refine things a little better, but it's still a net energy user. And the only way that it becomes worthwhile for anybody is they take your money and they take your kids' money to subsidize it. So they're strangling the petroleum fuel market. They don't have anything to replace it yet. They don't have refineries. They won't have the new refinery online until 2027. Anwar and all those places, even though Trump opened those up last year, they won't begin pumping until at least 2027 to 2028. They're still in the exploration phase in Anwar and in the Gulf of Mexico. It is just, you get people saying this stuff, right? Now, I've been writing about this stuff for years, right? I'm nowhere near the level of a guy like Edmund Kontowski, but because of him, I get tipped off to some of this stuff. Then because of MRC TV, I get to write articles about it and then constantly update my knowledge base on it as various presidential policies went through. Biden shut down Anwar in the Gulf, and then Trump reopened it, and all these lawsuits came around under Biden, all these things, right? And all the time, this was buzzing in the background, and people won't change it because the corn conglomerates and their lobby inside the corn states like Nebraska and Iowa and Kansas and others, they don't want it changed. They don't want the foreign ethanol allowed in. There's a friend of Trump's that owns basically the bulk of the sugar industry in the United States out of Florida. They don't want the sugar beet stuff coming in from foreign countries for their own purposes, because they've got a lock on the sugar industry in the United States. They have a massive tariff against foreign sugar. That makes everything you buy that has real cane sugar in it even more expensive. And the corn people don't want the foreign sugar either. They've got this symbiosis, and it's taking money out of your wallet. It's eating away your savings. It's making you work harder for everything you want. And they call this gas relief. Can we get relief from the central planners? It's just astounding. These people are incredible. While they're blowing up bridges, all those resources in another country with people they never met, those people never hurt anybody in the United States. And they blow these people up, destroy people beneath the bridge, having picnics. And then they make your life harder as Easter Sunday comes around. And Paula White is comparing Donald Trump to Christ. Unbelievable. It's acidically insulting.